What was Jesus doing while the church was suffering? The church was being persecuted, people were being arrested, expelled from their homes, and even killed, and yet, Jesus did not return. If he had all the power, if he could intervene at any moment, why did he remain silent? Why didn't he stop that suffering right at the beginning? This is a troubling question, and perhaps you have never stopped to think about it in this way. Because ultimately, this isn't just a question about the past. It's a question about the present as well. About why God seems silent in times of pain. About how Jesus and suffering connect in a way we often don't understand. And perhaps, to be honest, this has crossed your mind. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt like you were facing something difficult while God seemed unresponsive? When we look at the persecution of the early church, especially in the context of the book of Acts, everything seems to contradict what we would expect. After the death of Stephen, the persecution intensifies, chaos spreads, and Jesus' followers are forced to flee. And it is precisely at this moment that many would imagine an immediate intervention, but that doesn't happen. Then an internal conflict arises that is difficult to ignore. Does Jesus' silence mean absence, or is there something much greater happening behind it all? Was God really standing still, or was he acting in a way that no one could perceive? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, and it could completely change the way you perceive God's silence. And perhaps, as you listen to all this, something inside you is being touched, because this question isn't just theological, it's personal. God's silence is often not something we study, it's something we feel. It's that prayer that seems unanswered, that moment when everything feels overwhelming and you wonder if God is really seeing, if he is really listening. And that's why I want to hear from you too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Have you ever experienced a moment when God seemed silent? What did you feel? Sometimes, sharing this can not only help you, but also reach someone who is going through the exact same situation and needs to read what you wrote. And if this message is already making you reflect in some way, click the like button. It may seem simple, but it helps this content reach more people who need to understand exactly what we're talking about here. And if you want to continue exploring these mysteries of faith, understanding more deeply the attitudes, silences, and teachings of Jesus, subscribe to the Jesus Beyond Words channel. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Because ultimately, this isn't just a video, it's a conversation, a space where we begin to see what previously went unnoticed, and what comes next will start to reveal something that, until now, was hidden behind this silence. Because to understand this silence, we need to look closely at what was really happening at that moment. It wasn't a small difficulty, it wasn't just mild opposition. The persecution began forcefully in Jerusalem, striking at the heart of the early church. People who had previously lived in communion, sharing everything, were now being hunted, threatened, and torn from their routines. And then one of the most significant moments in this entire story occurs: the death of Stephen, a man full of faith, courage, and truth, who simply did not back down. He was confronted, accused, and even in the face of death, he remained steadfast. This was not just an isolated event, it was a watershed moment. From then on, everything changes. Fear spreads, tension rises, and what seemed stable begins to crumble before everyone's eyes. The church descends into chaos. People fleeing, families being separated, difficult decisions being made in a matter of seconds. It wasn't just physical pain, it was emotional, it was spiritual. It was a journey marked by uncertainty, where every step carried risk. And in the midst of it all, there was a silent, almost inevitable expectation. Now he will act, now Jesus will intervene. Because, from the outside, everything indicated that this was the perfect moment for Jesus to return. The stage was set, the need was evident, the suffering was real. Anyone with a logical perspective would think that this would be the time for the answer, the intervention, the end of that cycle of pain. But what happened behind the scenes of this story begins to reveal something much deeper, something that challenges our mindset and completely changes the way we see God's action. Comment below, this makes sense to me. Amidst all this pain, fear, and difficult decisions, there's a detail that many people ignore, but which completely changes how we see this story. Jesus doesn't appear. He doesn't intervene, he doesn't stop the persecution, he doesn't prevent the suffering as many expected. And this isn't something secondary. Jesus' silence here isn't a detail, it's the central point. Think about it for a moment. People were suffering because of his name, they were being persecuted for believing in the message he left. And yet, There was no visible intervention, no collective miracle to stop it all, no clear manifestation saying, "I am here, I will solve this now." And that is precisely what generates such a strong internal conflict. Because in our mindset, when something goes wrong, we expect an immediate response. We expect God to act quickly, to solve it, to protect in the way we imagine. But there, behind the scenes of that situation, silence remained. And this not only impacted that historical moment, but carries a direct impact on our own journey today. Because to be honest, how many times does it seem that God is also silent in your life? How many times have you made decisions expecting a clear answer, a sign, a direction, and all you found was silence? This type of experience shakes our faith, our mindset, and the way we interpret God's action. We begin to question, to try to understand, to seek some logic that explains this apparent distance. And it is at this point that many people get lost, because they interpret the silence as absence, as abandonment, when, in fact, there may be a much deeper hidden truth being built. And what begins to emerge from behind the silence is not emptiness, it's strategy, it's transformation. It's something that can only be perceived when we look beyond the obvious, when we begin to see what was happening behind all of this. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too," because it is precisely here that a turning point occurs that almost no one notices at first glance. While everything seemed to be crumbling, while fear and pain dominated the scene, something silent began to happen behind the scenes. Those same Christians who were being forced to flee began to spread out, and as they spread out, they took with them the message that had previously been concentrated in a single place. Do you realize the impact of this? The gospel, which had been confined to Jerusalem, was now beginning to reach new regions, new people, new realities. What seemed like the end of everything was, in fact, becoming the beginning of something much greater. Every difficult decision, every escape, every moment of pain was contributing to an expansion that no one had planned, but which was part of something much deeper. And this is where the mindset begins to change. Because what seemed like destruction was, in fact, expansion. What seemed like a loss of control was a strategy in motion. There is a hidden truth in this process that only becomes clear when you look beyond the immediate, beyond the emotion of the moment, beyond what the eyes can see. Jesus' silence didn't stop the mission, it multiplied the mission. This changes everything, because it reveals that, even when there is no visible intervention, there is a direction being guided. There is transformation happening, decisions being redirected, paths being opened in unexpected ways. The impact of this goes far beyond that historical moment. It redefines how we understand God's actions in the midst of chaos. And when you start to see things from that perspective, you realize that what seemed like a delay was actually accelerating something invisible. That the silence wasn't emptiness, it was movement, it was construction, it was preparation for something that was yet to be revealed. Comment below, "Now I understand." When you start connecting all these dots, a pattern emerges that completely changes the way you see everything. Nothing there was by chance. Jesus knew exactly what would happen. He knew that this persecution wouldn't destroy the message, it would spread it. What seemed like a collapse was, in fact, part of a larger plan, a strategy being built behind the scenes, far from people's immediate understanding. And that's where one of the strongest revelations of this journey comes in. The silence wasn't absence, it was direction. Jesus wasn't distant, nor indifferent to suffering. He was leading something that demanded movement, difficult decisions, a transformation of mindset. Because, if everything had remained comfortable in Jerusalem, perhaps the message would never have reached so many places. The impact that came later was only possible because of that initial moment of pain. This reveals a hidden truth that we often avoid facing. God doesn't work only through what we understand, but mainly through what we don't see. There is an invisible process happening while everything seems still. There is construction happening while everything seems confusing. And this changes how we interpret our own experiences. Because, bringing this to real life, how many times have you thought that God was silent on your journey? How many times did it seem like nothing was happening, that your prayers weren't being answered, that your decisions weren't producing results? But what if, in fact, something much bigger is being prepared? What if this silence is part of an adjustment, an internal transformation, a repositioning that you can't yet perceive? Sometimes, God's silence in your life isn't abandonment, it's preparation, it's alignment, it's a process that's taking you to a level you can't fully see yet, but that's already in motion. And when you start to understand this, you realize that there's an even deeper layer behind it all, something that goes beyond what has been revealed so far. Comment below, "I believe in this process." All of this starts to make even more sense when you bring this perspective to your own life. It's no longer just a story from the past, but becomes a mirror of your current journey. Because, on some level, we all face moments when things don't go as planned, when decisions seem to yield no results, when the path becomes confusing, and the silence becomes uncomfortable. And it is precisely in these moments that our mindset is tested. The way we interpret what is happening defines the impact it will have on our journey. If you only see what is on the surface, everything seems like a setback, a loss, a lack of direction. But when you begin to realize that there are invisible behind-the-scenes aspects being built, that there is a larger process underway, something changes within you. A new way of seeing emerges, a transformation that does not depend on circumstances, but on understanding. Because what seems like a delay may, in fact, be a repositioning. What you interpret as stagnation may be a time of preparation. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept, but also one of the most liberating. God works beyond what you can see. There is a dimension of reality that is not immediately perceived, but which is in constant motion, organizing paths, adjusting decisions, aligning everything in a way that will only make sense later. And when you begin to internalize this, you realize that silence no longer needs to be seen as a problem, but as part of the process. A space where something is being formed, structured, prepared with precision. Because, in the end, God's silence may be the place where the greatest plans are being built, and perhaps there is something even deeper behind it that you haven't fully realized yet. Comment below, "I'm starting to understand," and if you've made it this far, it's because, in some way, this message resonated with you, and not just as an idea, but as something that touched your own journey. And that's exactly what makes all of this so valuable, when we begin to see beyond the obvious and realize that even silence can carry purpose. If this type of content helps you see things more clearly, to better understand the inner workings of faith and the truths that often go unnoticed, consider subscribing to the Jesus Beyond Words channel. Because the goal here is precisely that, to continue exploring these profound teachings together in a simple but transformative way. And tell me something, if you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "This message was for me." This helps create an even stronger connection between those of us who are here, experiencing and reflecting on the same things. If this video made you think differently, leave a like. It's a silent way to show that this conversation made sense to you, and it also helps this content reach more people who might need exactly this. And before you leave, there's a video here that perfectly complements everything we've talked about today. Click on it and stay with me there, because this journey still has much more to reveal.